Today's the 26th day of Tishrei, the 28th of October, and we're in chapter 24 of Shorish Mitzvahs Atfilah, in Derech Mitzvosecha, page 256. And we're talking yesterday about the use of parables, and the idea that the parable really what it does is it hides, it conceals the mind, the seichel in something, the understanding in something. And what a person gets from it, from the parable, understanding the meaning of the parable. Now in English you can't say, there's no word specifically for the meaning behind the parable. But in Hebrew it's a very important pair of words, mashal v'nimshal, that they even come from the same root. But in English you say the parable, the meaning of the parable, the meaning of the aphorism, the meaning of the metaphor, what the metaphor refers to. So there's all kinds of ways to say it, but there's no simple way to say what's concealed inside the parable, inside the metaphor. So
when Plato gives that analogy of the cave, we don't have there's no word for the nimshal there, manyan.
Maybe in Greek there is, but I don't know. I admit that I didn't read Plato in Greek. I read it with the green translations, the Oxford series. The green were the Greeks, and the red were the Romans. It was very fitting, Greeks and Romans.
In my last semester of college, I spent 2 weeks in a Greek class. I don't know if you learned it.
Called the Lieb Classics. There they have a face like one side the Greek, one side the English translation. In any case, so everything in Torah has to be seen this way. I was learning the introduction to the Ibn Ezra yesterday with a friend, and Ibn Ezra.
You mean he has an
introduction to his commentary on the Chumash.
Yeah.
And Ibn Ezra is famous that he doesn't like mysticism. That's what he says. And he wants the pshat. Yep. He wants the literal meaning. He doesn't want to deal with anything else. So he even doesn't like midrashim. In general, he won't bring a medrash.
You know what? You're right. He doesn't.
So, but then he says, but there are certain places where you can't not bring the medrash. Why? So first of all, he says all the midrashim are correct. It's not that they're not correct. It's just that it's a different face of the Torah. He says it's one of the 70 faces. But I want the literal meaning. But sometimes you can't get away from the medrash. Sometimes you have to use the medrash. Why? Because the purpose of the medrash is to enlighten you with a understanding that's very hard to come by from just the literal meaning. Why? Because the literal meaning is direct light. It's just the light of the understanding. You just explain something. And either the person gets it or doesn't get it. The medrash entirely works by enclosing the idea in some kind of story, in some kind of parable, in some kind of other example, and then you're supposed to strip it. Now, because he wants the direct light, so it's very interesting that almost the entire Ibn Ezra is very well known, is like a medrash in and of itself. He became the writer of a medrash. His commentary is like a medrash. Why? Because he says, the things I really want to teach you, I can't teach you directly. You're going to have to understand it from what I say.
He uses that
all the time. He's like, and everybody knows, it's called the mystery of the Ibn Ezra. He's constantly, why? Because he really can't explain the deepest things without some kind of cover story. You have to have some kind of parable. You have to have some kind of clothing to the idea. And the problem is that when a person says the idea directly, then it's like ilah ve'alul. Then your mind and his mind are like a mother and a child. Like he gave birth to you. And you can't develop your own thinking. So what he's telling us now is that if you don't use parables, then you risk having the person become dependent on you, because they won't develop independently. They won't be able to independently arrive at the conclusion. And if you don't arrive at the conclusion independently, you become completely dependent on the teacher's understanding. And then you don't stand alone. And that you can't transmit wisdom this way. To transmit it, you have to, basically what he's saying is, in order for Hashem to really create something that will eventually mimic him, he has to couch everything he's saying in some kind of parable. And let the creation understand it for itself. Let it get it for itself. Let it come to the terms. And that's what Malchus of Atzilus does. That's what the kingdom of emanation does. It brings it down in a parable so that we can function independently. So we can build ourselves independently and then come to choose, like we said last week, choose to serve Hashem. V'nei k'tiv hashamayim kisi. Now there's another verse. It says that this was the Haftarah, the selection from the prophets for Bereshit. Hashamayim kisi ve'aretz adom agla. You don't read this all the time. You only read it when Shabbos Bereshit comes out as Erev Rosh Chodesh. It's not always, but sometimes it is. So Hashamayim kisi ve'aretz adom agla. What does that mean? The heavens are my throne, and the earth is my footstool. That's what it means. Hadom is a footstool. What's the idea here? Perusha parsa nikra kiseh. Meaning that what separates the world of emanation from the three lower worlds is also called, in this verse from Isaiah, is called a chair, a throne. What's the idea? Dinei הכיסא היא שבה ועל ידה נשפל גוף האדם למטה. שמתחילה היה ניצב הקומה, כשיושב על הכיסא משפיל את עצמו למטה וראשו וגופו נשפלים למטה. והגוף הוא היושב על הכיסא. So he says the parable here, this is a parable to explain all the parables. So the parable here is that when a person sits down, what does he do? He takes his brain, his mind, and he lowers it, because now I'm lower. Or the way he's going to explaining it here, focusing on the whole body. The whole body is coming down. When you sit down, everything descends. So it says that's the same language that we're using, that the Malchus of Atzilus descends. So the body is like the Malchus of Atzilus. It's like the body of the world of emanation. It's now descending. So what allows it to descend? That it has something to support itself with. Otherwise it's just going to fall. And there is such a state, that the Malchus of Atzilus falls flat on its face. And that's called Nafla lo tosif kum betulat Zion. It's like a different idea. That the Virgin of Israel, which is another name for the kingdom of emanation, has fallen, it can't get up. But here you just sit down. So you sit down, you're supported by the chair. So the chair is like the curtain. The chair is supporting the body. So it's supporting the idea behind what you want to say, and it's allowing you to bring it down. Bring it down in the sense to explain it in a more physical sense. והנמשל מזה למעלה, כי המידות העליונות נקראות בחינת גופה דמלכה, חסד רוע ימינה וכו' וכו'. So it says all the sfirot, all the midos of emanation, of Atzilus, they're called the body of the king. Tiferet gufa. It brings examples of each one of them is like a part of a body. So we say the right hand is, the chesed is like the right hand, and the gvura is like the left hand, and the body itself is tiferes, and so on, and so on. שבהם ועל ידם אור אינסוף משפיע חיות לעולמות שהם כלים שעל ידם ההשפעה כנ"ל. And as we explained, in order for Hashem to bring the infinite down into the finite, he has to create finite measures, and these finite measures, these are sfirot of the world of emanation. So we said the whole reason you need sfirot is in order to take the infinite and somehow limit it and be able to bring it down to us. And that's how he brings his effluence, his shefa down into the world. Omnam, כשצריך להיות ההשפעה נמשכת בביאה, צריך להיות עוד על ידי לבושים המעלימים המסתירים. So he says, in the world of emanations, enough to just have the sfirot. But when you want to come down to the worlds of Bria, Yetzir, Asiyah, creation, formation, and action, then you need further clothing, further vestments in order to be able to bring it down. And as we said, that this is what allows the creations to function independently. It allows them to feel that they are without an origin, and therefore they can function by themselves, and so they're not cancelled, they're not nullified in the mind of God. And this garment, the curtain that separates the world of emanation from three lower worlds, is called a cherub because of this. And there's another hint in this word, kiseh. He says kaf samech aleph. So you say kes aleph. Kes is like kisui. Shu kisui ve'ester lebchinat aleph. So the kiseh can also be understood in terms of its letters to mean a covering for the aleph. Who's the aleph? The aleph is who is the alufo shel olam. He's the creator of the universe. הוא גילוי אלוקות שבאצילות אלופו של עולם. וכמשל הכיסא שבו נשפע לגוף. Where does it say this? In this week's parsha. So it doesn't say it in this week's parsha. It says it in Psalms. It says Hashem lamabul yashav. What do you mean Hashem lamabul yashav? It's like Hashem sat down for the flood. What do you mean he sat down? What does that even mean? Hashem sat down. So we understand that the flood was a garment for what Hashem wanted to bring into the world. It was a way of teaching the world something. What did it teach the world? It taught the world, and after that everything changed, that there is din, that there is judgment. Hashem wanted to bring the judgment down. He couldn't just say, how could he have done it? He could have done it by giving the Torah. That's what he did later. He gave the Torah. He said, here's the Torah. If you do this, you get this. If you don't do this, you get the opposite. And people understand. Okay, this is called judgment. There's judgment in the world. But the Mabul, the flood, was the first example of judgment in the world. It was judgment. How does Hashem show his judgment? He did it through a flood. That's how he showed. And Noach understood. He got the point. And from then on, we suddenly have this concept that they have these 7 mitzvos now. They have these 7 commandments. Until now, what were they? They treated them like they were some kind of lifestyle. They didn't think they would be judged on it. They didn't think it would matter to them. But from now on, they have a different conception of reality. They now understand, and that's what Pirkei Avos says. It says that for 20 generations, until really for 10 generations, Hashem showed his compassion until Noach. Yeah. Kama erech hapayim lefanav, how patient he is. So it says that the world was living without judgment, because Hashem wanted to create the world with judgment, but he saw that it was too soon. So eventually he brought it in the right in the 10th generation. So Hashem comes down. What do you mean comes down? It could be any kind of coming down. If a person understands properly, so everything that happens in their life, from beginning to end, from the moment he wakes up to the moment he goes to sleep again, everything is Hashem coming down. Everything is a vestment. Everything is a garment for me to understand what Hashem wants from me. So Hashem is constantly sitting down, as it were, and constantly concealing himself. And this is the curtain, or here it's called parsa. Parsa is like a hoof. It's like a separation. Like the hoof separates the animal's foot from the ground. Right? The hoof is like a nail. It's very popular on YouTube now. I don't know why. Cleaning hooves. Have you ever seen these videos? They're very deeply, strangely satisfying.
For who? The horse?
For everybody.
Okay. Cleaning the...
Yeah, the hooves, it's for horses, for cows, all the animals that have hooves. So you see their hooves are like a mess. Because it's imagine you have this nail, and it's huge, it's the size of your hand, and you're constantly in the mud with it, and then it looks terrible, and it grows, and all kinds of, and then you clean it. And it turns out it's very, very thick. It's like 3-4 inches thick, this thing. So they have a lot to work on. They clean it up, mamish, and you get this strangely satisfying thing. It's like, oh, now it's clean. Now it's so that's a parsa. That's a hoof. וכיסא זהו מבחינת השמיים מקיפים עליונים שלמעלה מעלה מהמידות הוא בחינת סובב כל המין, כי המקיף הוא מקיף ראש ורגל. So now, where did this curtain come from? So this is the big principle. That really, the parable is of a higher source than what it wants to explain. Because he says, how did it even get there? How did you even get something in between emanation and creation? So he says, really, that shamayim, this parsa, this kiseh, this chair, where did it come from? It comes from something that's above the heavens. If the heavens here refer to the idea you want to get across, and the earth is the people that need to understand it, and the curtain or the hoof in the middle or the chair, this indicates the parable I'm going to give. So he says, how did the parable get stuck in between? So he says, no, it's not from here. The parable is really the bottom side, the bottom part of a circle that encompasses the heavens. So it's actually, on its top side, it's higher than the idea you want to get across. This needs to be explained. What do you mean? It's harder to get the parable than it is to get the idea inside the parable. Meaning it's harder to make a proper parable, a mashal that actually works, than to understand what's hiding inside the parable. So this, God willing, will start to decipher it tomorrow.
The scribe was famous. When people asked him questions, he told stories.
Right. To tell the right story is much greater
Much great, yeah.
than...